Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says Islamabad wants a peaceful and stable Afghanistan. Addressing the media after a meeting with the Taliban delegation in Islamabad, Qureshi expressed hope that warring sides in Afghanistan would soon start direct talks despite obstacles being created by spoilers. He said the Taliban are committed to the Doha peace deal and want all sides to honor the agreement. Sudan's Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok says his government does not have the mandate to decide on the normalization with Israel. Meeting U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in Khartoum, Hamdok said the matter should not be linked to Sudan's removal from a U.S. state sponsors of terrorism list. Pompeo's visit is aimed at pushing Sudan to normalize ties with Israel after UAE struck a deal with the Jewish state earlier this month. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says the United States should return to the 2015 nuclear deal if it wants an agreement with Iran. In a televised news conference, Rouhani said Washington's policy of maximum pressure has failed badly. Tension between two arch foes increased after the US abandoned the nuclear deal 2 years ago and imposed sanctions on Iran. India has become the world's worst hit country by COVID-19, reporting the highest number of daily fresh cases in the world for the last 19 days. The Indian Health Ministry has reported 848 deaths and nearly 61,000 infections in a day, bringing total cases to over 3.1 million. In Pakistan, 9 people have lost their lives to the virus overnight, taking the toll to 6,255 with over 293,000 infections. Globally, the pandemic has infected over 23.6 million people and claimed more than 814,000 lives. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says Islamabad wants a peaceful and stable Afghanistan. Addressing the media after a meeting with the Taliban delegation in Islamabad, Qureshi expressed hope that warring sides in Afghanistan would soon start direct talks despite obstacles being created by spoilers. He said the Taliban are committed to the Doha peace deal and want all sides to honor the agreement. The foreign minister also said peace and stability is needed for the regional development. The visiting delegation, led by Mullah Baradar Khund, hailed Pakistan's continued efforts for peace in Afghanistan. Pakistan's Special Envoy to Afghanistan, Muhammad Sadiq, and Director General of the Inter-Services Intelligence, General Faiz Hamid, also attended the meeting. The Taliban's political delegation visited Islamabad previously in October 2019. To talk more about this, we have Yaz Wazir, a former ambassador to Afghanistan, with us online. Thank you for your time at Indus News. How significant is this visit when the warring sides in Afghanistan are on the brink of holding long-awaited peace talks?
Well, the significance of the meeting obviously is there. The promised dialogue between the Taliban and the Afghan government has not been somehow getting on. Though it was promised in Doha when the Taliban and the US signed the agreement that very soon, on 29 February, they signed, and on the 10th of March, they were supposed to enter into Afghan dialogue after release of the prisoners by the both sides. But then the Afghan government, on one pretext or another, kept on delaying the release of the prisoners. And now still the problem is stuck with the same thing. 320 Taliban prisoners are to be released. and the Afghan government demanded half the Taliban, that 20 commandos of the Afghan government are in their custody, so they should release. So obviously the chances of the dialogue in that case are a bit not so bright. So this is, I think, the importance of it, that when they are here talking to the Pakistani authorities, some effort, I think, is on the way to make the intra-Afghan dialogue a success, to make it start quickly.
Mr. Wazir, will this visit by the Taliban help remove the remaining obstacles to the peace process aimed at ending the decades-long war in Afghanistan?
Well, as for the removal of the obstacle is concerned, that is between the Taliban and the Afghan government. As I said, it is because of the release of the Afghan Taliban in custody of the Afghan government. Now, if the Taliban continue to stick to their gun that we are not entering into a dialogue until all prisoners are released, then obviously the chances are not so bright. But if somehow some arrangement could be made between the two to initiate dialogue and continue with the release of the prisoners, then it can work out. So I don't know what actually has happened in the meeting with the foreign minister, but I am sure this thing must have been discussed. It can't be that it's not discussed. So I hope some way will be found. And once the Afghans start to talk to each other, then I'm sure they are quite capable of finding the solution to this long war in Afghanistan. So let's hope something positive come out of it.
Mr. Ayaz Wazir, thank you for talking to Indus News. I would really appreciate that. Now we are joined by Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid Lodi. Thank you for your time at Indus News. How significant do you think is this visit when the warring sides in Afghanistan are on the brink of holding long-awaited peace talks?
Thank you very much. I think it's very important, and the importance can also be gauged by that Mullah brother who's the chief negotiator from the Afghan Taliban side. He was heading the delegation, and from our side, Foreign Minister, of course, was there, and he was assisted by Sadiq Saab, Ambassador Sadiq, who's a special envoy to Afghanistan, and also by DGISI. So it means it was very important, and also look at the numbers of the members of the both sides. So one can gauge that it was very important. And I think the top of the line things were discussed. First of all, of course, the progress that is going on between on the agreement, the US-Afghan agreement. Secondly, the importance of intra-Afghan dialogue, and that it must start, immediately, and what are the impediments. Then also they talked about the Afghan refugees problems and their economic woes, and how I think Foreign Minister reiterated that our relationship with Afghanistan is historical. We have ethnic proximity, we have religious relations, and so many things. And I think the world must have realized now that how important it is to keep the communication open. We were being blamed that we have some connection with Taliban, and we always used to say that that is just that we keep on talking to them, so that a time may come that we would be requiring them to talk to us, and that time has arrived. Pakistan has not only been very helpful in bringing the Taliban on the table to talk to the Americans. Pakistan is, I think, carrying out extraordinary efforts to ensure that intra-Afghan dialogue takes place. Pakistan also, I think, cautioned the Afghan Taliban that they must be aware of the detractors, those who don't want these talks to actually succeed. And I'm sure they must have mentioned India and some other elements.
So General Lodi, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has informed the Taliban about possible threats to the Afghan peace process. Who do you think could be these spoilers?
I'm sure your viewers remember very vividly that just 3-4 days ago, we came to know that there was a renewal of some agreement between Tehreek-e-Taliban, Pakistan, and some other, renegade, groups which really want to hurt Pakistan. And we know that it is a combination of RAW and NDS, which is sponsoring them, and NDS unfortunately is part of one government. So I think it should be very clear that leading this group, those who don't want these talks to succeed, is Indian establishment, Indian intelligence agencies, and abetted by some of the elements within Afghanistan, like gun runners, like narcotic barons, and maybe some elements within the NDS and government. So we have to be careful about that. Afghan Taliban have to be careful about that. But Pakistan also suggested to the Taliban that they must take advantage of this historic opportunity which has arrived because of this US and Afghan Taliban agreement. I'm sure all said and done, this would have been a very useful meeting, and very soon you will see that the outcome of this meeting will become very obvious in the next 1 or 2 weeks.
Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid Lodi, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. Now moving on, a former leader of India's ruling party, Yashwant Sinha, says Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir must get back its UN-recognized status. Last year, New Delhi illegally revoked the autonomous status of the occupied valley. In a tweet, Sinha said he supports the restoration of Articles 370 and 35A. Former External Affairs Minister said he stands with the people of Jammu and Kashmir. He said the territory must get its statehood again. Sinha resigned from the Bharatiya Janata Party, calling Prime Minister Narendra Modi a threat to democracy. Earlier on Saturday, 6 pro-India political parties of the occupied valley demanded to revert the status of Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir as it existed on August the 4th last year. Sudan's Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok says his government does not have the mandate to decide on the normalization with Israel. Meeting U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in Khartoum, Hamdok said the matter should not be linked to Sudan's removal from a U.S. state sponsors of terrorism list. The two sides also discussed the country's political crisis and security in Darfur and other conflict areas. The US sanctioned Sudan over its alleged support for militant groups and the civil war in Darfur during the rule of Umar al-Bashir. Trade sanctions were lifted in 2017, but Sudan remains on the US list of state sponsors of terrorism. Pompeo's visit is aimed at pushing more countries to normalize ties with Israel after the UAE struck a deal with the Jewish state earlier this month. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says the United States should return to the 2015 nuclear deal if it wants an agreement with Iran. In a televised news conference, Rouhani said Washington's policy of maximum pressure has failed badly. He said the US must change its approach towards Iran after the presidential election. Tensions between two arch foes increased after the US abandoned the nuclear deal 2 years ago and imposed sanctions on Iran. In response, Tehran has breached key limits on nuclear activity imposed by the 2015 accord. Last week, the United States moved to reinstate global UN sanctions on Iran, but the bid could not be approved. Iran says its talks with International Atomic Energy Agency Chief Rafael Grossi have been very constructive. Grossi is on an official visit to meet President Hassan Rouhani, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif and other senior officials. In a joint press conference with Grossi, Tehran's Atomic Energy Organization Chief Ali Akbar Salehi said Iran and the IAEA have started a new chapter of cooperation. He said both the sides agreed that IAEA will work professionally and independently and Tehran will fulfill its commitments. Meanwhile, Grossi said both sides are working on reaching an agreement on IAEA's safeguards verification activities in Iran. Israeli forces have targeted Gaza for the 13th consecutive day since the US broke a deal between the UAE and Israel. The Israeli Defense Forces said their aircraft and tanks hit Hamas military posts and infrastructure. The statement read the forces carried out the strikes in response to explosive balloons launched from Gaza. No casualties have been reported so far. Meanwhile, officials in occupied West Bank said the Israeli military raided and demolished 8 Palestinian homes in Ramallah. Now, Germany has urged Greece and Turkey to solve their dispute in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea through direct talks. Speaking in Athens, Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said the risk of a military confrontation between the two countries persists. He said Germany and its EU partners stood alongside the bloc member Greece. The foreign minister said the current situation in the Eastern Mediterranean is equivalent to playing with fire. Tensions between the two nations escalated in recent weeks after both the countries lay claims to the region's natural resources. Earlier, the two countries announced that they are set to hold separate naval drills in the same region of the Eastern Mediterranean. EU foreign ministers are scheduled to meet in Berlin on the 27th of August to discuss the issue. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has ordered Prime Minister Hossein Arnouz to form a new government following parliamentary elections in July. Arnouz was appointed to the premiership by Assad to replace Imad Khamis in June. This comes as Syria grappled with a major economic crisis and plunging currency. Economic woes have been exacerbated by the USChina Act, which aims to cripple the Syrian economy. Moving on, India has become the worst hit country by COVID-19, reporting the world's highest number of daily fresh cases for the last 19 days. The Indian Health Ministry has reported 848 deaths and nearly 61,000 infections in a day. Globally, the virus has infected over 23.6 million people and claimed more than 813,000 lives. This report has more.
As the new coronavirus outbreak in the Americas slow, India has become the virus epicenter, with the number of cases and deaths continuing to surge drastically. The caseload in the country of over 1 billion people has crossed 3.1 million, with over 58,000 deaths. In Jamaica, the world's fastest man could not outrun the virus, as Usain Bolt has tested positive for the coronavirus. With some governments developing vaccines, WHO Chief Tedros Ghebreyesus has urged other countries to join forces.
Last week, I sent a letter to all member states requesting them to join the vaccine arm of the ACT Accelerator. I'm pleased to announce that as of today, 172 countries are now engaging with the COVAX Global Vaccines Facility, which has both the largest and most diverse COVID-19 vaccine portfolio in the world.
In Europe, France has reported a rise in COVID-19 deaths and cases as authorities scramble to curb the spread. Meanwhile, Spain has reimposed restrictions on mobility and mass gatherings after an increase in nationwide caseload.
The restrictions were relaxed too soon in Spain, with very short intervals between each phase. Theoretically, there should be 15 days in transition, but it only took a few days or less than a week to move into the next phase. Besides, Spain has limited capacity when tracing close contact, so the virus is said to spread if they cannot be found.
In Asia, mainland China has reported 14 new imported cases with no domestic transmissions in the 9th consecutive day. South Korea reported fresh cases under 300 for the second day, with 280 infections overnight. Over in Australia, cases are up from the previous day but under peak levels. In New Zealand, lockdown in the country's largest city, Auckland, has been extended to the end of the week.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, number of active COVID-19 cases has dipped under 10,000 as the spread of the virus continues to decline in the country. The health ministry says the recovery rate from the disease is 94% in the country. It says 9 more people died, while 450 new cases were found across the country over the past 24 hours. The nationwide death toll stands at 6,255. Sindh remains the worst hit province, witnessing nearly 128,000 infections, while Punjab has reported over 96,000 cases so far. More stories to follow right after a short break. Top trade negotiators from China and the US have held a phone conversation to review the progress of Phase 1 trade deal. In a statement, US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer said China's compliance with the trade deal was evaluated during the talks. It said Lighthizer, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He reaffirmed their commitment to fully implementing the deal. It said the two sides addressed Beijing's structural changes to ensure greater protection of intellectual property rights. The statement added both the leaders also discussed significant increases in purchases of US products by Beijing. The call was originally scheduled for August the 15th before President Donald Trump indefinitely postponed the sixth monthly review of the agreement. In the U.S., security forces and the demonstrators have clashed for a second night in Wisconsin after police shot a black man on Sunday. Democratic Governor Tony Evers said he has summoned the U.S. National Guard to protect the infrastructure and rescue services. A curfew has also been imposed in the state. This report has more.
Another African-American, Jacob Blake's shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin, has turned the lakeside city into the nation's latest flashpoint in a summer of racial unrest. Angry demonstrators set cars on fire, smashed windows, and clashed with officers overnight as Blake continued to fight for his life in the hospital. Speaking at a press conference, Kenosha Mayor John Martin Antamian said a third party will conduct an investigation into the incident. Hundreds of protesters confronted the mayor during his press conference.
The whole concept here is to talk about that we are going to make sure that justice is done for everyone, that people will have the right to make sure that the investigation is taken care of and is done correctly. And we have brought in,
Mayor of Kenosha.
We have brought in whenever a situation like this occurs, a third party must do the investigation. The state of Wisconsin is doing that investigation.
Unidentified protesters asked the mayor to arrest and charge the officer involved, while others kept asking for the name of the police officer. Demonstrators said the incident did not need a third-party inquiry as Blake was shot 7 times in the back in front of his children.
He said it has to go through a third-party investigation. That process in itself needs to be eliminated. That third-party investigation, no. The whole entire process, the system is completely corrupt. So for you to say that there needs to be the same process, third party, then an investigator, then through the DA, that is the problem. That is the problem. The process in attacking these officers who are constantly attacking these people.
Amid the increasingly tense exchange, Mayor Antamian retreated back into the building as the police in riot gear pepper sprayed the crowd. Democrats have called for an immediate investigation into the incident in the key presidential battleground state, while the Republicans have warned against rushing to judgment.
Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh are holding a silent protest to mark the 3rd anniversary of the Myanmar Security Forces crackdown. In 2017, the violence by Myanmar military forced 730,000 Rohingya to flee to Bangladesh, joining more than 200,000 already there. More in this report.
Over 1 million Rohingya live in the world's largest refugee settlement in southern Bangladesh. Myanmar does not recognize the term Rohingya or the community as an indigenous ethnic group. They are derided as Bengalis, implying they are illegal immigrants despite tracing their history in Rakhine back centuries. Successive military governments that ruled Myanmar stripped the Rohingya of identity documents, leaving many with no proof of their origins. The United Nations says Myanmar military's crackdown was also carried out with genocidal intent. Marking their Remembrance Day, Rohingya groups said the now refugees faced hidden genocide in Myanmar for decades. They appealed to the UN and other organizations to declare what happened in 2017 a genocide. The group said, due to COVID-19, mass gatherings will not be held this year. Authorities say 88 cases of the virus have been found in refugees camps, where 6 people have died.
Talks between the West African envoys and the Mali's military have ended without a deal on how the country should return to the civilian rule following last week's coup. Mali's military said the Western African mediation team will report to heads of state on the progress before a summit on the country later this week. It said the final decision on the makeup of an interim transitional administration will be made by Malians. It said no timeline has been established for elections to return the country to civilian rule. The coup leaders previously said they will stage elections in the country within a reasonable time. The two sides met ousted President Ibrahim Keita in the capital Bamako separately and said he no longer wished to resume duties. Amnesty International says over 1,100 people have been killed in northern Nigeria's rural areas during the first half of the year. In a statement, the director of the rights group in Nigeria said civilians in Kaduna and 3 other states reported living in constant fear. The Amnesty said villages in the south of Kaduna were affected the most, with at least 366 people killed since January. It said during one attack, security forces arrived at the scene but left when they saw the sophisticated ammunition the attackers were using. The watchdog said the ongoing failure of the security forces to protect villagers is shameful. Armed groups set fire to villages and frequently kidnap people for ransom. In Mauritius, the planned sinking of the broken stem of a Japanese-owned ship that caused a devastating oil spill in the ocean has completed in the open ocean. The National Crisis Committee says a major part of the vessel has been buried 3,000 meters into the ocean. The committee said a smaller section of the ship remains wedged on the reef, which the Japan's shipping company will remove soon. The company also said it will continue to collect suspended matter and work with local authorities to remove oil that has drifted to the coast. Earlier, Mauritius declared an environmental emergency when a Japanese oil carrier ran aground, causing a massive oil spill of 1,000 tons. Since then, joint efforts by Japanese and Mauritian authorities have removed most of the more than 5,000 tons of oil on board. Chinese State Councillor Wang Yi has warned that the world must avoid a new Cold War. Beijing's top diplomat made the remarks in an apparent reference to escalating tensions between China and the United States. Speaking in Italy, Wang said Beijing is willing to strengthen ties with the EU and cooperate further in combating the coronavirus pandemic. He said Beijing will always avoid escalation because it would be a step backwards. Earlier, China has lodged a stern protest with the US after a U-2 reconnaissance plane flew into a no-fly zone over Chinese military drills. A defense ministry spokesman urged the US to immediately stop such actions. Brazil's congresswoman lawmaker for Floridelis de Souza has been charged with ordering the execution of her husband, Pastor Anderson do Carmo. In a statement, Rio de Janeiro State Police said a total of 11 people have been charged in connection with the crime. It said an elected federal deputy, de Souza, enjoys parliamentary immunity, but she can be stripped of her parliamentary position. In a statement, de Souza's Social Democratic Party has suspended her party membership. As part of the inquiry, police also served 14 search warrants.
We arrived at the hearing in this second phase of the investigation. The first phase involved the arrest of 2 children, and today we closed with 12 defendants. She was responsible for qualified homicide, attempted murder, false identity, and being involved with organized crime.
3 people have died after being buried under a landslide in the northern Raisi district of Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The police said torrential rains have triggered landslides, one of which crushed a temporary hut. Raisi District Police Chief Rashmi Wazir said the victims were buried alive in the incident. He said several of their animals were also killed in the landslide. The Jammu-Srinagar National Highway has also been blocked in Batot area of the Jammu and Kashmir's northern Ramban district. Officials say a portion of the highway was damaged due to the landslide. The Oxford Vaccine Group says an experimental COVID-19 vaccine being developed jointly with AstraZeneca can be put before regulators this year. In an interview, the director of the Oxford Vaccine Group, Andrew Pollard, said the vaccine can move to the next stage if clinical trials show positive results. He said the current size of their sample is 20,000, while a total of 50,000 people will be tested to ensure safety of the drug before rolling it out. He said it is important to continue monitoring the mutations in the virus. Earlier, the Oxford vaccine showed promise in the first human trial when it produced an immune response. Santas in the UK are getting special training lessons to learn how to celebrate this year's festival by protecting themselves and the children from COVID-19. More about the lesson in this report.
Making sure Christmas can go ahead as usual, Santas in the UK have had a training lesson to learn how they can make traditional grottos COVID-safe this year. Entertainment company Ministry of Fun has been running Santa School for 25 years. This year, they decided to get everyone together even earlier than normal to reassure their clients and the public that it's possible to make the experience safe during the coronavirus pandemic. James Lowell, who founded the organization and ran the training event in central London, explained there are 3 key changes they have put in place.
Okay, right. First of all, masks. So we created these masks, which, as you can see, they're red velvet with white fur trim, just like Santa's costume. We made a feature of a mask. Secondly, there's the social distance grotto. And then thirdly is the giving the present. At the end of every meeting with a child, Santa gives children a present. And we need to make sure that can be done without Santa actually having to hand the present to the child.
Lowell said last year they had over 1,000 bookings over an 8-week period for Santas. But this year, business is slower than usual, with bookings down to half the normal numbers.
The Penguin Post. The Penguin Post.
We do have bookings. We don't have as many as normal. So I would say we've probably got under half of the bookings we would normally have. So that's having a big impact potentially on our turnover for the year. But the people, again, the people that haven't booked us haven't said no. They're still deciding what to do. There have been mixed messages, and I understand that, that the messages coming from Downing Street have not necessarily always been that clear. So people aren't entirely sure about what they can do. And I'm hoping that what we're doing here today at Santa School is showing people what they can do, and that they can do it magically.
Heaping praise on the performers who take on the role of Santa, Lowell couldn't disclose how much they get paid, but said the job is harder than it looks.
Indonesia's tourist hotspot Bali says it will not open to foreign tourists until the end of 2020 due to the coronavirus concerns. Island's governor, Wayan Costa, said the COVID-19 situation in the country is not conducive for international tourists to visit. Costa said a reopening will require careful preparation because failure can damage the island's recovery and reputation. Earlier, the authorities said foreign visitors will be allowed to return from September, but the plan has been scrapped over mounting COVID-19 cases. The move has renewed worries about the impact on residents and in an economy heavily dependent on tourism. Authorities have turned to domestic visitors in order to protect the island. Indonesia has reported more than 6,000 COVID-19 deaths and over 155,000 infections so far. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. TikTok has sued the U.S. government over President Donald Trump's executive order banning the company's American operations. In the filing in the federal court, TikTok said Trump administration's move was motivated by politics, not national security. The popular short-form video sharing app called Trump's decision a pretext to fuel anti-China rhetoric as he seeks re-election. It said the company has taken extraordinary measures to protect the privacy and security of user data. Earlier this month, Trump dubbed the video sharing app a national security threat. Qantas Airways says it will lay off 2,500 more people by outsourcing its Australian ground handling operations. Qantas's head of domestic operations, Andrew David, says outsourcing the move will save an estimated $72 million each year in operating costs. The airliner says the step has been taken to lower costs as it braces for over $7 billion loss in revenue this fiscal year due to the pandemic. David said an additional $72 million in cost of equipment will be saved in the next 5 years. These job cuts will be on top of 6,000 announced earlier in June, causing a 30% staff shortfall overall compared with the pre-pandemic time. Most of Qantas ground handling employees are receiving government aid due to the decline in travel demand after losing their jobs. Facebook's French subsidiary has agreed to pay $118 million in back taxes after a 10-year audit of its accounts. France is pushing hard to overhaul international tax rules on digital companies such as Facebook, Alphabet's Google, Apple and Amazon. French authorities say the big tech groups pay too little tax in the country where they have significant sales. Facebook's spokesman said since 2018, the company had decided to include its advertising sales in France in its annual accounts. As a result, Facebook's total net revenue almost doubled in 2019 from a year earlier. The US stocks have dropped slightly as Apple shares declined for the first time in 6 sessions. The fall overshadowed optimism after the US and China officials pledged a firm commitment to a Phase 1 trade deal. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is trading lower by about 0.5%. The S&P 500 is trading marginally lower. Nasdaq Composite Index is at fractionally lower. Meanwhile, crude oil prices rose over production cuts in the U.S. Gulf Coast as Tropical Storm Laura was forecast to become a major hurricane. And now the weather situation from around the globe. That is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.